forward by Dr. Biden. As David seamlessly wove himself into the day-to-day of Joe's life, he became something more than just a photographer. He became one of Joe's most honest advisors and our friend. And it's just a really nice commentary, and I couldn't agree more. So I've been really lucky to call David a friend since 4th of July 2007, and I remember that because it was my first trip to Iowa. I was a reporter on the campaign trail, and we got on the Barack Obama campaign bus together, and just became friends after that, and spent a lot of time there together over the course of that campaign, that Democratic primary campaign, and both got to know then Senator Joe Biden pretty well. I had covered him in Washington for a few years, but being in Iowa was really where you had the time, sometimes talking to him for hours, because his campaign wasn't as robust at that time. Obviously did not win the Iowa caucuses that year. And we, just got a chance to get to know each other, and then obviously got to work together when we were both in Washington. So I'm honored to do this. I've really enjoyed the book, and I'm glad to be doing this conversation. I will point out, in David's 8 years working with the vice president, he traveled more than 1 million miles on Air Force Two, which is the plane that the vice president travels on, covering 47 states and 64 countries. So it's just something that so few people can boast in their life. And when I talk to my students, I teach journalism at USC Annenberg, as you heard, I like to showcase that these are the types of ways that you can tell stories, so many different ways. You can start in journalism and tell stories in a variety of ways, and it's really cool to get to do that. So thanks to everybody. And I wanted to just talk about, how you heard how we got to know each other, David. Talk about how you ended up in Washington and how you ended up with a role like this.
Sure. So like Christina said, we met in Iowa in 2007. After college, I worked at a couple different newspapers, including the Albuquerque Journal. And after that, moved back to Iowa in 2007 to cover the presidential primary or caucus, I guess, there. So I covered all 16 candidates for president that cycle, 8 Democrats and 8 Republicans, I think it was, including then Senator Biden. And as a young journalist, I was really impressed with his ability to connect with voters. As Christina mentioned, he would talk to a lot of the people on the ground. He didn't just sort of blow in, speak, and leave. And when he got picked up as the vice presidential nominee to then Senator Obama, I started reaching out to folks in the campaign to see if I could come on board the campaign and help. And that never happened, but I did end up moving to Washington in 6 weeks, I think, after the inauguration in 2009, and ended up working there for 8 years.
I should point out, one of the reasons I had myself on mute is because I've got my 3.5-year-old running around the house. I'm also 9 months pregnant and having a baby on Monday. So just like for dramatic effect, I like to tell people that. It's like less dramatic in a Zoom room, you'd never know. But the importance of family, is always something that if you listen to one Joe Biden speech, that you come away with that. You really know that, this is something that's been a through line for his entire life in public service. And even in his own books, the vice president, his first book, Promises to Keep, talks a lot about his upbringing and what his family brought to him. And then obviously his second book is more focused on his children while talking about his own public service. And, I think that's something that you were able to really capture, these intimate family moments. I mean, even going along on some family vacations in some cases. Can you talk about what you've learned about Biden through these images? And we'd love to see them.
Sure. I'm going to start a screen share here, hopefully. And we'll see if I mess it up. There we go. Hopefully everyone can see that now.
Looks great. Yeah.
Good. So I think a lot of people don't know this about the vice president. He lost his first wife and daughter in a car accident in 6 weeks after getting elected to the Senate. And his two sons, Beau and Hunter, were also in the accident. They survived. He was sworn into the Senate at their bedside. And I think that really I was going to say informed, but that's not the right way to put it. I think that really drove the importance of family for him. And he made a commitment to his boys that he would come home from Washington every night. So he took the train down in the morning and he took the train back at night, so that he could be there when they got up in the morning and put them to bed at night. And that continued on actually through the campaign, although I don't know that I was super keyed into that. But certainly at the White House. And this first photo I'm showing here is his granddaughter, Natalie, and she'd stopped by the office to show him that she'd lost a tooth. I think she'd been over in her grandmother's office. And, you know, I think family was just so important to him. You know, grandkids would call during the day to ask for help with a project or to see if they could come over to the house that night to swim in the pool. And, you know, Natalie and Hunter in this next photo were Beau, his eldest son's children, so the vice president's grandchildren, and their dad deployed to Iraq for the first year of the administration with his Army National Guard unit. And so they, I think it was a stressful time for their grandparents, a stressful time for the grandkids, and they would sometimes come sleep over at their grandparents' house, and then they'd come into the office in the morning for a little bit. And so the vice president was down the hall meeting with the president, and the kids were writing him notes before they left. This is him with his granddaughter Finnegan. I think they were on the way to Poland, or I guess we're on the way to Poland. This is aboard Air Force Two. And so they're looking at the map and just kind of doing a you know, little geography lesson. His son, Beau, backstage at the Democratic National Convention in 2012. This was in Charlotte. And I think, I tell people, I think this is one of my favorite photos, certainly that's in the book. It's the Vice President, Dr. Biden, and they're waiting to get introduced to stage, and everyone's a little nervous, and there's all this cheering, you know, going on in the arena, and there's just this really wonderful moment where Beau's reaching over and straightening his dad's tie. That's always been special to me. It's such a simple, sort of loving father-son moment. And I think there's one more here, or maybe two more. Christina mentioned family vacations. I went on a couple. It's sort of an interesting balance, I guess, because he's still vice president. He's still doing calls with foreign leaders. There was some foreign policy crisis. I don't remember what it was during this trip. And he was, you know, on a satellite phone patched into the Situation Room doing calls, but they also, you know, he took his kids and his grandkids and they rafted down part of the Snake River, which was a lot of fun. And I was very surprised, but this photo ended up on their Christmas card that year.
Where are you standing while taking that photo? I'm curious.
I am on the banks of the river. I was not in another boat, but I talked to the guides before they, you know, the rafting guides, and they said, you know, there's a couple pullouts along and you can kind of jump out and get a couple pictures there. So, and then this last photo is at their home, actually in Delaware, in the library. The VP really loves books, and so he's got this beautiful sort of wooden library, and they were doing a taping with Reading Rainbow. LeVar Burton's off on the left, and with their two youngest grandkids. So yeah, I think the family is just such a big part of his life, and he really prioritizes that. And that was a fun, sort of different non-office side of the vice president that I got to photograph.
Yeah, I love that. And, you know, not to mention his family has been always so involved in his campaigns. You know, his sister ran so many of his campaigns. They're always there on the campaign trail. It was quite a family affair, or still is, I would say. So, you know, in your time there, you made almost 1 million photographs. That's a lot. You know, 1 million miles in a plane is one thing, but 1 million photos is a different thing. And it must have been really hard to narrow them down to a book that, you know, we can still lift up and, you know, show in front of a Zoom screen here. Is there like a moment that stands out to you that you chose for the book that really like exemplifies Joe Biden and the things that you view as his leadership and commitment to this country?
Sure. I think there's a couple moments that come to mind. Uh, it was, as you sort of alluded to, really challenging to narrow down the photos, and you get down to sort of a batch that you like, and then you start laying them out in a book, and you discover that photos don't necessarily play off each other well page to page, or you just have too many pages and the publisher doesn't want to give you more pages for your book, and so you're making these difficult choices about what's important to tell the story, or just sort of helps the ebb and flow of the mood in the book. But this first photo, I think, speaks to who the vice president is. He grew up, I think the joke during the Obama administration was that he walked out of a coal mine in Scranton, and in fact, he was not a coal miner. His father and grandfather were not coal miners, but he did grow up in Scranton, in a very sort of working class, middle class neighborhood. And dad lost his job, and they moved to Claymont, Delaware, where they moved to another very working class neighborhood, so that his dad could support the family. And I think because he didn't move to Washington like so many senators and even some representatives do, he stayed really connected with his community and the people he was serving. This is a photo. It was during the Recovery Act, which was passed in the early Obama administration, early in the first Obama administration, and it was spent $830 billion to rebuild infrastructure, schools, roads, bridges, a lot of other projects, and it was in part to rebuild things, and it was in part to get people back to work. And the vice president was, at some point during the speech, talking about the fact that these construction workers were back at work, with this crushed up road behind them, and because they were back to work, they were buying shoes for their kids and going to eat lunch at a diner, which seems rather idealistic right now, but I think that connection to working people, to people who live paycheck to paycheck, is really something very special about the vice president. And I think the other photo that speaks to me too about who he is, this is at Arlington National Cemetery. I think it was Veterans Day, and he's comforting a woman who lost her son. It's in Section 60, which is where a lot of the Afghanistan and Iraq veterans are buried. And we went to Arlington a lot. We went and visited wounded warriors a lot. I think he felt that it was really important to see both sides of the coin. If you were going to send them to Iraq and Afghanistan to fight, that you needed to be there when they came home. And some people came home with PTSD, and some people came home without a limb, and so that was a big part of really both the vice president and Dr. Biden's commitment to military families. So that's another one that I think is powerful for me personally. It was powerful to be there.
A beautiful day too. Makes me miss living in DC. Now, you talk a little bit, you have this chapter in the book called Every Story Matters, and you have this photo you're going to show us that is your favorite, showing, Biden embracing someone. And it just, strikes me as the interesting thing about the job, right? You are working for the government and representing the government, and also telling the story of an administration, which is very different from journalism in some ways, but you also have to capture every single thing that happens. And which is really the same as being a photojournalist for the New York Times. You have more access and more ability to tell the story. And so, that's one of the things I really like the book. You were able to kind of tell the story about how these 8 years unfolded in the White House on both personal and professional levels, all the different places that he traveled and different types of things that he did. So talk about why this photo is meaningful to you, and in general, why does every story matter when you're capturing 8 years of the White House?
Sure. So the photo is from 2012. It's down in Florida again. and it was during a campaign event. And, the vice president is well known, I think, Christina would say, for being friendly, gregarious. When he works a rope line, he shakes every single hand he can get to. He hugs people, he signs autographs. He really wants to talk to every person that came, and that becomes more and more unfeasible when you're stacking up 3 and 4 events a day, especially with larger crowds. And this particular event, this young man whose name is Kobe, had not been able to get up the front and hadn't gotten to shake the vice president's hand. And after we pulled the VP backstage to leave, a staffer kind of noticed him. He looked really upset and started talking to him and ended up bringing him backstage. And I remember taking this photo. I remember thinking it was a beautiful photo. I remember trying to not ruin the moment, I guess, by being there. I don't remember the conversation at all, but I did some digging because I had the kid's name in the caption, and actually found that he'd been interviewed by the campaign afterwards. And he said, it was so important to me to get to tell the vice president what he and President Obama had done for our family. I think they were on, I don't know if they were on food stamps, but his mom was getting some help so that she could work and the kids could go to school. His older brother was in college on Pell Grants. And he just said, all these things the government does, really do matter. And they've made our family better, and they're giving us these opportunities. And I just wanted the opportunity to thank the vice president. And I think it's a special moment, and it's an ordinary moment. It's this interesting combination of both, because this happened hundreds, maybe thousands of times during my 8 years there. But there's something about this photo that's just so stark and so clean, and there's not a banner behind him, there's not a bunch of people. It's just this really private moment where he's sharing a moment with an ordinary American, and it's really powerful.
Thank you for sharing it with everybody. And talking about powerful moments, as you've referenced, the vice president has lost people in his life. It's had, a number of personal tragedies, the Obama family as well. I thought, can you walk through what you learned documenting some of these moments? The one, most people are going to be familiar with is Beau Biden dying,
Sure.
and obviously has been discussed quite a bit, but there's so many.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of really wonderful moments during the administration. There were sort of these uplifting, big achievements, steps forward for the American people. The one that always comes to mind for me personally is the passage of the Affordable Care Act, just because I know people that have health insurance now that would not without it. There certainly were numerous other sort of policy accomplishments, achievements. And then there were some painful moments too. And certainly the loss of the vice president's son, Beau, was the hardest for them. And I'm certain for other people, possibly myself included. Beau was really special. He, we talked a little bit earlier about how I would occasionally go on these family trips, and I would try to be there to take some pictures, and I would try to disappear to let them enjoy time as much as you can enjoy time as a family surrounded by Secret Service someplace, to just sort of give them room. And Beau would always come find me and make me come sit down with the family for a meal, because that's who he was. And he was sick for a while before he had glioblastoma, and was treated in Texas, and then in Philadelphia, and then Texas again. And he eventually passed away at Walter Reed. I was on vacation with my now wife on the West Coast. I'd taken a long weekend to go out backpacking, and hiked up far enough up a mountain that my phone connected with a cell phone tower outside the park, and got all this string of messages that I needed to come back to Washington right away. So I think what's so powerful for me, and I guess I should talk about the photo. It's right before the public viewing, I guess. Thousands of people lined up to come pay their respects to the vice president and his family in Wilmington, and this was 5 minutes before they opened the doors, probably. I think what's powerful for me, aside from the emotion in this photo, is that Dr. Biden and the vice president really were able to channel their pain and their loss into working harder and advancing policies. So the president announced the establishment of a cancer moonshot initiative to sort of leapfrog cancer research forward and make huge strides in treatment and diagnoses. And he asked the vice president, Dr. Biden, to chair that initiative. And they went to all these cancer centers and met with patients and survivors and doctors and really tried to work through their grief to make things better. And that's really unique to me. There's a couple other photographs here. Is from the memorial service. President Obama delivered the eulogy for Beau and talked about how the vice president had become like a brother to him, and that they considered themselves, he and Michelle, the first lady, considered themselves honorary Bidens. And this was 2 weeks later, I think, down in Charleston, South Carolina, and it was after the Mother Emanuel AME Church, where a white supremacist went to a Bible study and shot the attendees at the end of the service. And the president and the vice president, first lady, second lady, were both there. You can see the president just off on the right side of the photo, and they're waiting backstage before this big memorial service. And I think the first lady just kind of looked over and saw the emotions that were running through the VP's face because he'd buried his own son 2 weeks before, and she just kind of gave him this big kind of half hug squeeze to boost him up. And I think it does speak to sort of the development of their relationship over the 8 years, and the strength that they got from each other. This is another, I think a couple months afterwards, it was a reception for National Guard generals at the House, and the VP got on to Beau and started talking about Beau and just sort of emotionally started to break down a little bit. And I think that, again, it continued to be hard for them. And then this is back outside. These two slides are out of order. Sorry about that. This is back outside the Mother Emanuel AME Church. I think a week and a half after the shooting, and greeting parishioners there and the pastor and the mayor. So yeah, it was, I think the Biden's ability to sort of work through tragedy and continue to improve people's lives is really admirable and speaks to their character and who they are.
And one of those things, you really heard this showcased in the convention, is how much they did with military families and still do. Obviously being in military family themselves, and then that's prime duty of serving in the administration. But can you talk a little bit about the story behind this next image, which is very touching, about their relationship with soldiers in uniform?
Sure. In 2010, we went on a unannounced trip to Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iraq. These were always hard because I had to not tell people that I was leaving town and just disappear. And
it was hard on your friends too.
It was hard on my friends. It was hard on my coworkers. It was hard on my family. It was hard on relationships because I just would not come home from work because we couldn't talk about it because they're dangerous places, and the vice president's a high value target to a terrorist organization. So we'd gone to Afghanistan. He'd had this full day of meetings down in Kabul, the capital, the president and the prime minister, and we got on a helicopter and flew up to this forward operating base up, and you can see, the snow-capped mountains in the background. Just a really stunningly beautiful landscape. But so the steepness of the mountains was just really incredible. And excuse me, in this photograph, he's presenting a Bronze Star to a staff sergeant. And this is another one of those instances where I'm there and I'm making photographs and I see that something is happening, but I don't necessarily, I'm not part of the moment. And so Workman later, the staff sergeant was later interviewed by the Washington Post about receiving the medal, and he received it for heroic achievement in a combat zone. He ran over to a burning Humvee and was able to get the door open and was trying to pull a fellow soldier out. And by the time he got to him, it was too late. And so in this moment, he had just told the vice president that he didn't want the medal. Again, I didn't overhear this. This is what he told the Post. And he said to the Post, he said, the vice president softly replied, he said, "I know you don't." And he said, 8 years later, I still remember how he looked into my eyes and I could tell that he knew what I was going through and what I was feeling. I think the direct quote was, "I feel like he really understood." And it's really, I think it's a powerful reminder of what's happening when we send troops overseas. And that's why I kind of referenced that in the Arlington photo a couple frames ago. We're sending people off to fight in really dangerous situations, and some people come back and they're fine, and some people come back and they aren't, and they've seen terrible things or experienced terrible things or have lost their legs. And so I think the trips were challenging, not just for my friends and my family, but for us. And it was probably personally dangerous too, although I don't really remember thinking about that a whole lot at the time.
Your friends did. I will just say that was always, I obviously had personal concern, to make sure everybody's safe in the administration, but there was that moment when it was like such a relief when you came home, we knew everything was okay. So learning about it through the press was always hard too. On a slightly more upbeat tone, obviously the Joe and Jill Biden relationship it's fun to watch. They clearly, love each other very much. And there's a lot of just happy moments that you capture in this book. So you've got a lot of images that you want to show, just mischievous times. You're going to talk about this moment. I was actually there, I'm pretty sure, this day. And I just did a guest lecture talking about the press corps and their shenanigans with the vice president. So we can talk about that too.
Sure. There are a lot of fun moments. Dr. Biden's a really wonderful person, and I say that not just because she wrote the foreword for the book, although that's obviously special to me too, but she is a little bit more fun and maybe a little bit more lighthearted than her husband. And I don't remember if this was the first time or the second time at this particular party that she had snuck up and attacked him with a super soaker. I'm pretty sure that a wig was involved in at least one of the attacks. Maybe some sort of disguise as well. I'm not sure. This was they held these barbecues, I think 3 or 4 summers during the administration. And they would invite the White House press corps and their families to come, and sort of it was supposed to be off the record. I recall a columnist for the Washington Post that wrote about it every time. But it was sort of this relaxing afternoon. He got to meet spouses and kids of reporters, and people got to eat hot dogs and hamburgers and have a water gun fight, and it just was sort of a fun break from 10 or 11 hours a day in the office of meetings. And I think there's another photo here. Yeah. This is the last year of the administration. They'd gone to Switzerland. He'd spoken at a conference. They'd gone to dinner. I was waiting outside by the cars, wasn't really expecting to make a picture of them coming out of dinner. And she came out just early enough to make 2 snowballs and chuck one at him right as he came out the door. You can see his Secret Service agent there in the background, just sort of wincing, I suppose, is the right way to describe that expression. Yeah, they were. It was always a lot of fun when she came along on a trip. She sort of knew how to keep him in a good mood and really bring a little bit of fun. And it was also, and I don't have any photos in here of this, but I did actually get to go on a couple of trips with just her, 2 or 3 times to Africa and once to Southeast Asia. And it was really interesting to cover her. She did different events. She didn't go have bilateral meetings with heads of state as much as she would go to an orphanage or a school. As an educator, she always liked to go to schools and talk to teachers and students. And so yeah, those were some really great experiences too.
That's great. Now, obviously, we can't talk about love without talking about my favorite image of the book, which you're going to show us and tell us all about Blissful Life.
Sure. So I always preface this, and Sydney makes it sound like it was such a slog, but you know, the job is hard. The days are long, the hours are long. You work a lot of Saturdays and Sundays, you work a lot of holidays, you travel a lot, you cancel a lot of vacations to see your family. This particular day, I'd flown up to New York. The vice president had given a speech. We'd flown back. I think we landed at 5. We were supposed to be done. We were supposed to go home. It's gonna be like one of those rare days where you maybe got home by 6 or 7, and landed. And he came back and said, you know, there's a couple events I need to go to on the way home. So we went to a book signing for Congressman Jim Clyburn of South Carolina. And then we went to a fundraiser down the street, just dropped in for a couple minutes. And then he was like, where's Jill? We get on the phone. We find out she's at a reception that she was hosting with Senator Mark Begich of Alaska. His wife and the Dr. Biden were hosting this reception. And so we go crash her reception, pretty literally, actually. And, you know, the vice president spoke for a couple of minutes, was shaking some hands. I'm probably 7:45 at night, getting a little grouchy, kind of want to go home. And then this interaction starts, and he's talking to this staffer, and he gets on the phone, which is a thing that he does, because somebody says, hey, my dad, mom, girlfriend, kid, big fan of yours. He's like, let's get him on the phone. So he gets on the phone, calls her dad. Dad thinks it's a robocall and hangs up. So we get dad back on the phone. She's now bright red. I now think this is funny because it's 7:45 at night, and somebody being embarrassed is sort of this special, different moment. So I started taking photos. And at the end of the reception, I went over and gave her my card and said, you know, if you shoot me an email, I'll send you the photos. And a couple emails later, we agreed to get coffee. And I think our 4th wedding anniversary is next week. So it was an unusually great day at work for me at 7:45 at night.
I love that. That is fantastic. You know, and I think that's also what I like with the book is you capture a lot of lighthearted moments, you know, be it of the Bidens as a couple, but also just things that were fun. And I think that's something people look at Joe Biden, you know, they consider him to be a fun person. I will point out, you guys should definitely ask questions if you have them, and we are going to get to those soon, but David does have a couple more fun shots to show.
I just realized I'm running long. I'm so sorry. I'll speed it up.
No worries.
Go for it. I will point out that the first Instagram photo that on Biden's account, right, was you're doing the sunglasses.
It was. It's in the book. I think it's one of the last photos in the book. So this is, the vice president has a 1967, I believe, Corvette, which has mostly lived in a garage since he's been vice president, because he's not allowed to drive, or strongly discouraged from driving. Anyway, the last year of the administration, Jay Leno reached out. He's got a TV show, and said, I'd really love to do a taping with the vice president, like him to drive his car, like to drive his car too. So he took the Corvette out to the Secret Service training facility, which is out in Maryland. And you can see there is a Secret Service agent sitting next to him in the passenger seat, and did some laps around the facility just to kind of remind himself what driving was like. And then the next day did this taping with Jay Leno, which was a lot of fun. I think former Secretary of State Colin Powell was there as well. He also is a Corvette guy. This is a taping we did with the president in 2015 or 16. Taping not worth explaining. The gist of it is the vice president's asking which pair of aviators better reflect his mood. They were all the same, so it was sort of a terrible but funny joke. Got another one from the press parties. I think this was a different year. The kids kind of figured out they could gang up on him at some point, and that there weren't really any ramifications, and they thought that was a lot of fun. And I think this is the last photo I'm going to show tonight. It's actually not in the book. It was one of those tough choices when we were running out of pages. But Dr. Biden had gotten out to the plane early for a joint trip. She had, I assume with some help, gotten herself into an overhead bin and had closed the door. And she just laid there and waited until people got on the plane and opened up the bin, and then she screamed at them. And they screamed back. And then they would close the door and then wait for the next person to get on and do it all over again. I think she got 3 or 4 people. So that was really, just kind of a lighthearted way to end this, I think. Yep, that's it for me.
That's great. Thank you, David. So ask your amazing questions of an incredible, talented photographer.
Thank you so much for your interview there, Christina. That was very thought-provoking, very fun. Does anybody have anything they want to run by David? Maybe you mentioned this and I missed it, but I'm wondering, how does one become an official White House photographer? Do you just get a call one day and your work has been noticed by someone higher up? How did that come to be for you? I
sent a lot of emails. It's not a publicly listed position like most federal jobs are. It is a political appointment, I guess. I think I sort of alluded to this at the beginning, but I had been reaching out to folks since he got picked up as the VP nominee in August of 2008, I guess. So 6 months, 7 months before I started. Reached out to folks on the campaign, and then, once they got elected, knew a couple of people that were working on the transition, which is sort of the bridge between the campaign and the White House. And I went to DC and had coffee with some people. They were like, "We'll keep you in mind." Didn't really hear anything. And then, I got a 6 a.m. phone call. I was actually living here at the time, and here in Albuquerque. And they're like, "Are you still interested in the job?" And I was like, "Yes, I am." And they're like, "Great, could you be here tomorrow?" And I said, "Sure." I was like, is it an interview? And they're like, "We'd like you to come out for a week and just kind of see how you get along with the vice president and how it goes." And so I went and bought a suit and a tie and probably some dress shirts. And I flew to DC the next day, and a week turned into 2 weeks, and then 3 weeks. And at some point I flew back to Albuquerque and boxed up my stuff and shipped it to DC and sold my car in a weekend. But it was I don't know that that's the traditional route, but that is how I ended up there.
Sounds like a bit of a whirlwind, but an exciting one. Anybody in our audience have anything they want to ask David?
I think Steve does, right?
Oh, Stephen. Okay, I'll unmute you and then you can just ask him yourself. Hi.
Yeah, hi. I was just wondering, David, when you think back on when you first were buying that suit, how was this job compared to what you expected it to be? Was it what you expected it to be? Was it completely more engrossing than that? How has it changed, I guess?
That's interesting. I bought a suit. I borrowed some cameras from Steve and I's mutual friend, Craig. I I think it was both what I expected it to be and not what I expected it to be, I guess. As a former journalist, I treated it like journalism. I took pictures of things that I thought would tell a story or would be significant historically, and there's some photos I'm thinking of specifically that are in the book that I didn't get a chance to talk about tonight. But at the same time, you work for an administration, and the administration has a message or a narrative that they're trying to drive, and so they are going to release photos that help with that narrative, and that is different than journalism, right? I despite the ranting about the deep state and the fake news media and everything else, I can say as a former journalist that I went to assignments without an agenda, right? I covered football not in support of one team or the other team. I covered political rallies, to show what happened there, good or bad, and so I think that really bothers me, I guess, some of the journalism bashing that I hear out of DC. But yes, the administration has an agenda. You choose photos that help, I guess, tell that story, and that is different than journalism, and that is maybe a little bit different than what I expected going in. But my expectations as a 24-year-old journalist moving to DC, I think we're probably not that deep about what I was getting into.
Steve Westman, did you have a question? Get you unmuted there.
Hello. Hi, Amanda.
How are you doing?
How are you?
Good. Good.
I do. With your process of choosing the photos, is there one that you really hedged on maybe not putting in there? I'm sure you teetered on several, but were there, how much of a teeter board was that with some of the photos you thought about not putting in there?
The last 50 photos, I think, were the hardest. You're getting closer and closer on the page count, right? Because I think the magic number in my book was 256 pages, and we'd started. I think we'd gone in with 450 images, and I don't remember what the final count was, but those last 50 pictures where you're just like, is this important? If we put this in, what could we take out? If we take something out, it's hard. And I don't know that there's a right way to do it. I think with 2 more weeks to have done it, I may have made some different decisions. I think that photo of Dr. Biden that I showed at the end in the overhead bin is the photo that I most regret cutting from the book. Not because it's important to who they are, I guess, more than, but I don't know that it's important to telling the story, but it's so fun and it's so lighthearted. And it reminds me, there's this, I think of it as a famous photograph, but I study White House photographs, but there's a photo of Nancy Reagan dancing on the cabinet room table that was taken, I think, the last day of the administration. And, they were she and President Reagan were looking around the White House, and she's just like, I've always wanted to do this. And she kicked off her shoes and jumped up on the table. And I guess I liken it to that, right? It's this moment that you don't expect. And I don't expect, Nancy Reagan on a table, and I don't expect Dr. Biden in an overhead bin. And so it's a little different, a little special.
Right. I do. Obviously, I thrummed through this quite a bit this last week. Anyway, and I love the book. So anyway, thank you for answering that.
Thank you.
Did you have to jump through any special hoops to get the book published? This is your first, correct?
It is my first book. It likely will be my only book. Special hoops.
Official, like with the official process or the White House or Vice President Biden. I'm just wondering how that.
I reached out. I'm trying to think how to best say this. I reached out to the campaign. They were, sorry, two folks on the campaign. I should not say the campaign was supportive, but I reached out to people to I guess make sure that they were comfortable with the idea that I was doing a book, and they were enthused and supportive. And I think I am both surprised and guess I shouldn't be, but I am surprised that they trusted me and didn't really ask a lot of questions. And I think it's a really beautiful book, and I hope they're happy with it. By they, I mean the Bidens, not the campaign.
Well, it's wonderful work. I'm excited to get a couple of copies from Bookworks. We have some signed copies there on hand. I'm just wondering, as we close out the event, you talked a lot about Biden's character. I'm wondering what kind of leadership qualities you saw in him that you think would take him all the way to the White House. If you want to comment on that at all. I know you talked a lot about his compassion and his empathy and his kind of origins there in Scranton. Overall, what kind of characteristics do you think make him a good leader?
Sure. I think that Scranton and Claymont, Delaware too, just so we aren't leaving out one state in favor of the other, I think is fundamental to who he is. I think growing up working class is fundamental to who he is. I think he has a sense of what it's like to live in a family where you maybe have a relative living with you or two relatives living with you, and you're maybe a little concerned about how you're going to put the next meal on the table. And I think that understanding is so crucial to understanding the experience of millions of Americans who are less fortunate and whose interactions with government are maybe different than those who can comfortably send their children to college or comfortably buy a second home, or a lot of other things that I think are the American dream, but are not always the American reality. And I think he's an honest, decent man that wants to make life better for Americans. And I think that certainly to me came through during the convention. I thought the testimonials about his life and his experience were really powerful, and I think that I hope that voters get to see that. I hope in whatever little way that my book helps maybe show some people that didn't know a lot about him, who he is. And I guess I would, as sort of closing remarks, would encourage everyone tonight to, if you are not registered to vote, please do so. If you are registered to vote, make sure you have a plan for how you're going to vote, because that's coming up in 47 days, I think. And if you've done both of those things, then maybe think about talking to your friends or your neighbors, because one weird thing about politics is that millions of dollars of advertising don't always sway voters, and a personal conversation from someone you know often does. And by sway voters, I mean just to get them to vote. So that's really important, I think, for all of us, even if you don't like Joe Biden.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that reminder. We've been trying to remind people of that here through Bookworks as well. The most important thing you can do as a patriot is to vote. You can do that very easily by logging on to your county clerk and getting an absentee ballot, being able to mail in your ballot, see what's happening with your home state. I know every place is different, but here in New Mexico, they're making it very easy for us to mail in. So try to do that well in advance. Well, I want to thank both of you, David Lienemann and Christina Bellantoni, for your work. It's important to keep our strong fourth estate here in the U.S. We got to keep these politicians in check. and provide the real picture to our constituents here of what's going on. So we look forward to all the new books coming out this fall. Lots of new bestsellers on politics and current events, of course, which you can get from your local bookstore or from Bookworks. Our website is bkwrks.com. It's Bookworks without the O's. Pick yourself up a copy of this beautiful photo book, Biden by David Lienemann. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone.